So I don't know whether this is nerd files or general interest, but I have a capacity to make general interest basic information into pretty nerdy content. So maybe we'll just go with both. This is an interesting project. I have ages ago, in fact, pulled 2 pairs of Matsus, 2 pairs of Fishers, and 2 pairs of Solomons for one customer to discuss options for an all-around fleet. The 2-pair fleet is like a universal goal for most serious racers. When you get into 2 pairs, typically you want to differentiate them pretty clearly so that on race day, you have a really quick and simple decision to make. As a self-supported racer, you could set up your cold ski with a colder wax job and your warm ski with a warmer wax job, and you get to the race, everything's scraped and brushed and ready to go, or maybe you're just doing some top coats or whatever. But you put one of each on and you take a quick test, and absolutely one thing everyone has to remember is if you're splitting hairs, doesn't matter. If it's not a big difference, you just never worry about it. But if there's a glaring difference, it's obvious. So testing skis on race day really can't break your brain. And if you have too many options, it gets so complex and you go down the rabbit hole. You don't want to do that. So the 2-pair fleet for a self-supported racer is really good. People who are carrying more than 2 pairs are typically adding specialty skis, like an ultra cold ski if they're in the upper Midwest, or a clear base ski for slushier conditions if they're in the East or maybe anywhere in the world, because that's going to happen. At any rate, the way we select a 2-pair fleet really depends on what the company offers and what they give us to work with and what the differentiators are in their design concept. And that's where comparing Salomon, Fisher, and Matsus gets kind of interesting. It's worth noting that Fisher for years really held the crown of universality. A ski with really broad range application, a really universal camber profile, a really universal base material is the gold standard at every level, including the World Cup. World Cup racers want to race on their best pair of skis. Throughout the history of racing, I guarantee you, everyone has their favorite skis. Maybe 1 pair, maybe 2 pairs, but the bulk of the racing is going to happen on a very small number of skis, even if it's, rumors of Teresa Johaug's carrying like 70 pairs of skate skis during her career. And I'm sure there are people out there with that or more. It takes a huge amount of service time to service and test all those skis, but you guarantee there are going to be a couple pairs that are in every single test because people have their favorites. Our job here is to just whittle out the deadwood and cut down to the favorites. And what we don't have the capacity to do without a World Cup wax truck and a full team behind us is find the magic bullet on the day. We want really robust solutions. So Fisher had this 610 concept for years as the single most robust solution in the ski world. When Salomon came out with their carbon ski, it had a really thin core thickness profile, and that meant that a lot of the carrying capacity or strength had to be built into the camber. That meant that the ski was going to deform a lot under load, and anytime you're having a ski deform a lot in order to build the spring strength to carry the load and resist inputs, it's going to have a narrower range. This is why we're often trying to upsize people onto longer skis so we get that thicker core thickness profile and bring material strength and camber into harmony. Well, Salomon, at the outset of their carbon ski generation of production, had the softest material in the industry and therefore really leaned heavily on camber deformation to create carrying strength. When they came out with the model that they're using now, the geometry and core configuration that they're using now, back in 2017, I think in World Champs in Falun, it really hit the ground running like incredibly well. You remember that 50K race when Salomon had how many in the top 5? Maybe like, did they sweep the podium or just, I can't remember. Alex won, Muzzy was super fast. All I know is Tad Elliott took a loaner pair of skis that Alex didn't race on and had the best race of his career. Those skis showed up and were just amazing right away. Well, one of the amazing things about them is that they really upped the core thickness profile, changed the stiffness profile, put more strength into the material, and these skis became much, much more universal. So Salomon really has made a big play for universality in their production. And maybe the most surprising thing of all is Matsus, which for years and years had really the distinction of being awesome in a very narrow range, Again, we're talking about material configuration, geometry being the driving force. When they started their Redline 2.0 project, which then turned into the 3.0 project, primary objective was to address that. And for my money right now, Matsus has the most universal material set in the industry. And this is going to surprise some people because I don't think that it's really commonly accepted, but we continue to see Matsu skis not just in both camber concepts, the F2 and the F3, and we can talk more about that in a minute, but really camber variations, tip splay, no tip splay. I've seen these skis run fast in all conditions, and if I had to pick one brand for a single pair or a two pair fleet that I had the most confidence in, the ski's not falling off on the shoulders of the condition range, it would probably be the Matsus right now, and that's going to surprise some folks. Okay, so how do we pick a two-pair fleet? Well, let's go brand by brand and just take a quick look. Salomon. Salomon has an incredible base material program. Their cold base is known as the F base. And, well, it's a little bit specialty in Europe. I know from talking with Jason Cork a couple years ago that Jesse uses the F base really frequently in Europe. We have found in North America that the F base, the cold base, is a really broadly universal cold base, pretty much in every region. It just does very well. Salomon manages their reference cambers around the target conditions as well. So, you know, the F-base ski, the blue ski, has a more typically cold camber profile, what we would consider to be cold, which is less tip splay, longer contact areas. It's arguable whether that's universally cold. It's about half the time that's what you want in cold. About the other half of the time you want something that looks traditionally wet. It's a little confusing. But what I will say is that throughout most of our selling area in North America, this cold ski is a tremendously good universal cold ski and something I would definitely want to have in my bag as an option. And so here it is for this two-pair fleet. We picked one of those. The universal ski is where they changed the base material this year. The 10 base is the new universal base. It used to be this Y base. I'm sure there are more technical terms for these things, but yeah, it's the 10 base. And it's been in racing for a couple years, and they used to differentiate it when they're writing tip numbers with a little dot right at the end of it, and that was the tip off that it was a 10 base. And those skis with a dot were really often used. So what I'm talking about, of course, is they write the last three digits of the serial number up here to differentiate the skis and help people identify them, and a little dot at the end. That was the code. At any rate, universal ski is pretty universal, a little more focused pressure distribution, and a broader range of moisture management capacity. And that universal base, 10 base, very, very good, can handle cold. So for this setup, we would put a new snow fine cold grind on the F base, probably use our greenstone, which does really, really well on the harder cold bases. So a G4 grind on that would be really probable. And on this ski, we're going to grind it much more universal, probably a B363 plus. That grind can handle transformed cold snow, even down into the single digits. If the snow is grainy or man-made or just thoroughly transformed, even in fine crystals, it's going to do very, very well. But it can also handle moisture, even in new snow up above freezing. Very, very broad range. And so this ski is going to become kind of the older snow or wetter snow ski, and this is going to be the fresh new snow ski. And there we go. Salomon, two-pair fleet. That's pretty robust. At that point, that racer is going to consider adding a Salomon clear base ski. That new rainbow base is still the same 126 base that they introduced back in Falun 2015. Oh my God, I said 2017 was Falun, but that was Lati, of course. I apologize. So if you got this far into the video, you'll be able to go back and correct me. 2015, Diggs won a medal on that 126 base in a snowstorm when all the people who had chosen clear base skis from other brands were totally screwed. Really versatile base. So that Salomon clear base would be the third ski for this skier. But this is really the core two-pair fleet. All right, Fischer two-pair fleet. Now, Fischer has a base program as well. They have a cold base and they have a clear base. Both of those bases are much more marginal in their range than what Salomon produces. The A5 base is a little bit hit or miss. When it's an awesome batch of base material, those skis can be pretty universal. Patty Caldwell skied from 30th after the classic leg up to 10th at World Junior Pursuit on a cold base ski at like 33 degrees Fahrenheit with a TG12 back in Val di Fiemme when he was just a junior skier. And that ski did really well for him in a really wide range of conditions, but that's a little bit exceptional. In general, we don't take too many cold base skis because they tend to be a little over specialized, whereas Fischer's 28 base, their plus base, is, yeah, it's got to be the most universal base out there. I mean, at least by reputation and over time. So when we look at Fischer's program, we of course have different options. There's this new 61K ski, which is, you know, more split in the tip and tail. I'll address that in a different video. There's the cold model. There's the standard plus model. Most of the time, we're staying with the 610, 28 base, standard plus model Speedmax, and in this case, that's exactly what's happening. Fischer makes a ton of productions of these skis, and they vary the reference camber just slightly. I guess I shouldn't say that they vary the reference camber. That refers a little more, well, it refers to the whole thing. A reference camber is a standard that they're working to. So when they're setting the cambers, they have a shape, and they turn the screws until they approximate the shape. And there's going to be variation allowed, but they want to come really close to a shape. Pretty much every company needs to work off of reference cambers when they're setting up the presses. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about that. With Fischer, we tend to look at some specifics of the camber profile. Again, in terms of the length of the contact areas, yeah, to a degree, the amount of tip and tail splay, although that's not nearly as big a deal with Fischer. We also look at the resting cambers. That they can be very, very telling in terms of differentiating warm versus cold cambers, but that's also not a hard and fast rule. These two pairs have similar resting cambers. They're not too far apart. They're both very broadly universal. I'm really looking mostly at release angles, contact zones, and specific characteristics that I know are going to nudge the ski one way or another. And we're going to rely on grinding to fill in the blanks here. The thing about this 610 plus model is that you can really change the character of the ski pretty dramatically with grinding. This cold ski here, I put a wet grind on it. It's not going to become a wet ski. That's not happening. But probably either one of these can be steered really, really quite well with grinding. But you do need to know what you're looking for in the cambers, because those have a way of kind of biting you in the butt. If you pick a universal ski that you think is universal and you put a cold grind on it, it might not go if it doesn't hit some markers in the cambers. It's really hard for me to show you guys the subtlety of cambers on this format, so I'm not going to even try. But we spend a lot of time trying to identify those characteristics when we're selecting the skis, and that's really where we're putting in the time, is looking at a whole bunch of these aim down the middle 610 plus model skis and differentiating them into cambers that we know are going to tolerate cold, cambers that we know are going to excel in warm, and then making them really good in those conditions. One note really applicable to these Fischer skis is it's very hard to take a ski that is disposed toward warm conditions and turn it into a cold ski by putting a cold grind on it. It doesn't really work. The best you can get out of any ski is to bring the grinding and the camber profile into harmony. So a truly universal middle of the road Fischer, you can for sure nudge it universal warm or universal cold with grinding. But a 610-28 that's really set up for colder conditions, probably not going to do that well in the warm if we put a warm grind on it. And for sure the other is very true as well. If it's really set up for warmer conditions, then unless you're taking it to Canmore, you don't want a cold grind on it. Canmore, you really almost want a wet ski with a cold grind. It's a bizarre place. But yeah, there we go, Fischer. Did I explain it well enough? Let's talk about Matsus. This is interesting because not only does Matsus have different reference cambers for different models, they have two distinctly different camber profiles aimed in two different directions. So their F2 and their F3 cambers tend to confuse people a little bit. People really want these to be a cold ski and a wet ski. They're not. They're just not. The difference is, oh, I might have to edit this video in order to show this off really well. Where are my little clamp? Okay, can we see this all right? I'm back. I've clamped the tips together right where they contact anyway so that you can see a little bit of the difference between the cambers here at rest. Cambers at rest really define how the cambers are going to express under load. They're very similar material sets. These F2 skis have a higher resting camber for sure, but they also push the high point a little further and extend a little further in front with the bridge. Further, as that camber carries high further out into the forebody, it's less of a tapered sort of arrow type camber like this F3 ski. It implies that the material is going to deform more at that contact zone, carry more tension in the material that's on the snow. This F2 ski is built for faster conditions, harder snow, more transformed snow. It can handle plenty of moisture. Sometimes it's lights out fast in wet conditions. It also does really well in cold conditions. This one I've kind of earmarked as a ski for a B363 Plus, kind of like the universal ski from Salomon. And in fact, that Salomon ski I kind of picked with similar camber characteristics because this is a really good way to hit that broad range, more transformed snow, higher moisture snow, wetter conditions. As long as this ski has enough compactability in the snow, resistance to deformation, and that can include softer snow with big enough granules as long as you don't sink too much and the snow kind of compacts underfoot. This is going to be really good. Any packy wet snow will be great. The F3 ski has a much lower camber profile through the forebody, and the high point is further back, and the ski rests lower at rest. And overall, it's going to be a lower deformation camber, put less tension into the small materials that are carrying the load on the snow, and it's going to have slightly shorter contact areas. This is aimed overall at being a little more floaty, a little, well, one of the things you feel on this ski, how to put it, is that you're really centered on the bridge. It's a slightly more even fore aft load. With the F2, you tend to be a little behind the bridge. To me, it feels like your toe is elevated just a little bit and the ski feels really, really slippery, but it's a little more work to get right on top of it. Some people ski really naturally on these. For me, it's got to be more specific conditions that reward them. The F3, you tend to feel right on top of the ski, really centered in the ski, and it's super natural to move on for someone like myself because I have a bad knee. I can't load a lot across my my patellar tendon, so I've got to be high on the ski like this, and the F3 is super natural to move on. So once again, this F3 ski, I'm probably going to put a G4 grind on it. That grind has remarkable efficiency in moisture. When we went out to Whistler for Super Tour Finals and Canadian Nationals last year, an F3 with a G4 grind was lights out the fastest ski in the fleet I took out to play with for Gunner in the first race, which was a mix of new and old snow and quite high moisture. I mean, it was a warm day. We were on some warm waxes, and it was so much faster than the other skis. We obviously put a bunch of hand structure on it, but before testing any hand structure, it beat all his nominally wet skis. And yet it had been super, super fast all season in the cold. Once again, we're looking at the universal response of these material sets to carry in a really wide range of conditions, and then just matching the grind concept and the snow type that we expect to use with the different camber profiles. Typically, we end up having a good conversation with customers about the difference between the F2 and the F3 and how it might have an impact on their specific skiing, because it's kind of a personal thing as well as a more universal tool. Some skiers end up with the F2 being the more frequently used skis, other end up with the F3 being more frequently used. In general, in the longer lengths, the 187 and 192, the F3 is probably slightly more universal Whereas in the shorter lengths, like 182, 177, the F2 is a little closer to the natural expression of the material set, and I think it's a little more universal. And that was confirmed also in a conversation with Sylvain at Modsus this year. He recognized a similar trend in World Cup athletes. Okay, that's a whole bunch of information. We work differently with different companies to target these two pair of fleets that are going to cover a really broad range for customers, and it always involves assessing the geography, where the target conditions are, what races are important, or even if they're not racing, we sell to a lot of recreational skiers who just go out and hammer out the kilometers, and we're talking about what time of day are you skiing, what trails are you on. That helps us really kind of identify the prevalent conditions that need to be addressed, but it's a different strategy, brand by brand. We don't do the same thing with each. We really want to utilize the strengths of each brand. Nerdy enough? Nerd Files? What do you think? It's got to be. That was pretty nerdy.